Hello, welcome to this month's webinar. My name is Michael Kramer. I am the Calibration and Inspection Program Manager at Perry Johnson Laboratory Accreditation. Appreciate everybody registering and logging in with us this afternoon. Today we're going to be looking at the general requirements within 17025-2017. Which will encompass both impartiality, section 4.1, and confidentiality, section 4.2. These are the first two sections of the 2017 standard. We'll also interject as we're going along some of the comparisons between the 2005 and 2017 standards in regards to these two areas. Okay, as always, this webinar is being recorded. It will be available, the recorded version, at the PJLA website, pjlabs.com. Also on the website, under the webinar tab, are the PowerPoint slides. So if you just like to have a copy of the slides, you can retrieve them from our website. Again, this is today's section 4.1, impartiality and confidentiality. Duration should be no longer than an hour. As always, you can ask questions during the course of the webinar. I do request that you keep them in regards to the subject matter that's being presented today. Should have a box there on your screen labeled as questions. When we conclude, we'll take time and go through and answer as many as we can. So I'm going to start off, very first section of the standard, section 4.1, which is the requirements in regards to impartiality. Impartiality is one of the new definitions in the standard. And it's simply the presence of objectivity. A couple notes there to clarify the definition given there. Talking about objectivity, that means, and these notes come right out of the standards. They're right under the definition for additional information. It means conflict of interest do not exist or are resolved, and so not to adversely influence subsequent activity of the laboratories. So partiality, other terms that can be used to express the elements of impartiality: freedom of conflict of interest, freedom of biases, lack of prejudice, neutrality, fairness, open-mindedness, even-handedness, detachment, balance. So looking at 2005, we realize right now that most of you folks will be having your next assessment to 2017. Probably several here has already transitioned. Again, the date we have to come on site, for those of you that are accredited with PJLA and do the transition, is August 31st, 2020. After November, at the end of November, the 2005 standard will be withdrawn, obsolete. We can no longer assess to that standard. So I know you're probably more familiar with the 2005. That's the one we've been operating under here for since 2005. And impartiality. So it's no stranger. It's not nothing new. looking at the 2005, was addressed in various sections within the standard. Or 4.1.4, organizations performing activities other than testing or calibration, the responsibility of key personnel that has involvement need to be defined to identify potential conflicts of interest. 415B, having arrangements, and these are all requirements in 2005, to ensure that its management and personnel are free from any undue and external pressures. 415D, have policies and procedures to avoid involvement in any activities that would diminish confidence in the impartiality. E, define the organization and management structure of the laboratory is placed in any parent organization and the relationship within the organization. Specify the responsibility, authority, and interrelationship of personnel that has an effect on laboratories. You're going to see these requirements carried over. I would say we're going to dive into the 2017. That is more of an ongoing activity now. So it's magnified in 2017. This has its own section. 2005 is mentioned a lot in interest, and the term conflict of interest is only mentioned once. So again, 4.1 is dealing with impartiality in the 2017. And I believe when we're done here, you'll see it's more important for laboratories to show how they have handled the issue of impartiality. So with that being said, again, the bigger emphasis on impartiality and management conflict of interest. So something you might want to be thinking about is how do you plan to address these issues in the way that you can discuss this with the assessor? Going to be asked during the assessment process, how is impartiality addressed? How is it handled? How is it safeguarded? So with that also being said, sure, there are requirements. It is required in 17025 2017 that you have to meet these requirements in order to maintain your accreditation. But with that being put aside, even without that being placed on the lab to maintain their accreditation, if you think about it, just in general, something is you'd want to keep in place anyway. Situations of undue influences, conflict of interest can lead to test results being either intentionally or unintentionally incorrect. If that is discovered after the results have been issued, it can be devastating to your business. So in other words, they are required, but it's good common sense that our lab places importance on impartiality. So going to look at the requirements, 411 in 2017. Laboratory activities shall be taken impartially and structured and managed so as to safeguard impartiality. So it is therefore more important in the laboratories to show how they have handled the issue of impartiality. The laboratory is responsible for impartiality of the laboratory activities. And we're talking about laboratory activities. It extends far beyond the nuts and bolts of those folks that are doing the calibrations or testing within your facility. Has anything that incorporates laboratory activities. I mentioned a few things here: auditing, procurement, maintenance. Folks that are performing those duties should these requirements apply to them as well. If you're contracting, subcontracting, if you have organizations going out and doing the sampling for you, that will also fall under the realm of these requirements. So laboratory activities is all encompassing. It's not just the folks that are actually performing the testing and calibration, perhaps producing the results, the management of the lab. Those folks that are directly in these other functions fall under these requirements as well. So under 411, it says the laboratory shall be structured and managed as to safeguard impartiality. So, how would you go about doing this? Review the structure reporting lines. Look for potential conflicts of interest, such as results being used internally. So you have your own in-house calibration lab, for example, or doing your own in-house testing for products you're manufacturing or producing there on site. This is common for production-related organizations, but also those involved in design engineering. So where possible, removing direct reporting lines, such as laboratory technicians or management, or a laboratory manager reporting directly to the production manager or design engineer. It may be an option to look at alternative reporting lines. I think what we're looking at there is different emphasis on the top of the agenda. Yes, production, design engineer, and those folks that are working in the lab. Basically, those folks in the lab are just concerned with reporting the results in an impartial manner and reporting them true as their testing and calibration activities produced during the lab, without having any undue pressures brought within by other folks within the organization that has other agendas. Got to meet production deadlines. One thing I always, that's not included in here, but I normally would not like to see laboratory personnel reporting to folks that are involved in sales. .412, the laboratory management shall be committed to impartiality. So that's a requirement. How can this be demonstrated? Have a few things here. Of course, this is a list that can expand well beyond what I have here. So some of the examples I have here are coming from top management. Have a special impartiality policy, or involve a statement about impartiality in the quality policy. Discuss impartiality on a management review, and to include the discussion in the minutes of the meeting. It's not, if you look at the inputs and outputs, that's not included, especially for smaller organizations where things aren't changing a whole lot. A good place to document that is being done on an ongoing basis during the management review, adding that to the list of items. Of course, documented training and agreement of staff, including top management, on potential threats to impartiality. I think overall management creating what I have referred to here, a culture of quality. Therefore, installing a culture of openness, honesty, and integrity goes a long way. Make sure employees know that they can speak up if they feel something is right without the worries of some form of repercussions. Establish a quality culture within the organization. .413, the laboratory shall be responsible for the impartiality of its laboratory activities. It shall not allow commercial or other pressures to encompass impartiality. It's a requirement, I think, verbatim right out of 2005. Puts the responsibility on the lab. If you look at this, there should be safeguards in place. Okay, 414, the lab, and I've highlighted a couple words here, bold printed here, I like to expand on. The laboratory shall identify risks to impartiality on an ongoing basis. This shall include those risks that arise from activities or from its relationship or from the relationship of its personnel. However, such relationships do not necessarily present a laboratory with a risk to impartiality. Couple note under there, so a relationship that can threaten impartiality can be based on things such as governorship, ownership, management, personnel, shared resources, finances, contracts, marketing, including branding, payment of sales commission and other inducement for the referral of customers, and et cetera, et cetera. There's probably other things that can be included in there. So this is the first time in the standard we see risks. So Section 8.5 is devoted to actions to address risk and opportunities. So if anything else, we see the word shall there. So again, shall, when that appears in the standard, that's different than a should. A should is a recommendation. A shall is a requirement. So if you look at it, what's being required here, and this is specific to impartiality, you shall identify risk to impartiality, and it's on an ongoing basis. So this requirement here can also be crosswalked within the laboratory when you're looking at a compliance with Section 8.5. You want to be aware that you at least need to be looking at what's stated here in 4.1.4. You have to look at any risk to impartiality. There may or may not be anything, and if there are or are not, what are we going to do about it? Is it an acceptable level? Is it not an acceptable level? So again, this is an ongoing activity. A couple examples here how this can be shown that it's ongoing. The laboratory shall make a risk analysis of it. Perhaps you have adopted a risk checklist, or maybe one of the other type of risk analysis, like a SWOT analysis, to comply with Section 8.5. Include any risk to impartiality with it. Should be incorporated with contract review. New client, identify if there's a risk connected to the customer or the activity, to any impartiality concerns that might be presented in regards to your organization doing their testing or calibration. Other things you're doing to comply with the standard. Hopefully there are also vehicles for improvement and vehicles for compliance is management reviews, internal audits. Also during a performance review, if you're doing that with your individual personnel, can provide inputs to identify any potential risk to personnel. So again, management review. So it's not a specific input or output as specified in 8.9. There is a other section which, if anything else, if it's not something that an organization, things are changing where it needs to be pretty much on a daily, weekly basis, are there any risk to impartiality? I would say at least bring it up during the management review, document it, create a record that is being done. So since this is an ongoing activity, it is important to identify changes in the laboratory activities that may become a risk. Anything changes within the organization, personnel, structure, reporting lines. A couple examples that come to mind. Even if there are no changes in the laboratory activity, the impartiality risk analysis should be at least reviewed during the management review. A few examples of risk to impartiality. Could be interest due to shareholdings, family relationships, etc. Also came up as a requirement under one of the notes, possible relationships that could threaten impartiality. They're pricing jobs, putting time pressure on staff, being pressured on site to get past results. To repeat the task, probably with instructions for a slightly different location. Could be when you have reporting lines, say within lab reporting to those in production. Testing for compliance on an in-house products, especially if the tester also has production responsibility. Sort of goes hand in hand with what I just said. Okay, so let's say we've analyzed impartiality. If a risk to impartiality, and this is a requirement in 415, if a risk to impartiality is identified, the laboratory shall be able to demonstrate how it eliminates or minimizes such a risk. So you can eliminate, if there is a risk, eliminate or reduce to an acceptable level. So that's usually, you see the term risk mitigation. So there is a risk, that's at an acceptable level. You lower that risk. In other words, you're doing risk mitigation to a less high risk status, and reduce it to a level which your organization is willing to accept. Like the laboratory should be able to show how it handled the issues of impartiality. So these activities should be documented. Examples may include change to personnel if the initial personnel are compromised, letting other parts of the laboratory perform the test of if the initial part is compromised. Got employment contract update. Often with 2005, might have required to have policies, procedures in place, have employees signed policy in regards to impartiality. A lot of times it's incorporated with the next section, confidentiality, to update it. It's not just a one-time thing with the employee. Put it in their folder, they don't see it again for the rest of their employee status. Needs to be updated, perhaps during the performance reviews, and have employees read it again and perhaps re-sign it and redate it. Quarantine time, another example here. In the instance that says, here's an example, staff has received additional payment for the recruitment of a new client, and they are not permitted to be involved in the testing or calibration within 1 year of this additional payment of this client. So again, I suggest you create records when these issues come up. Just strengthen that you are complying with it. So a small little question, a few simple questions exampled here where you could show this was looked at. Creating a record, basically creating a record showing what was done. So basically, if something, if you're reviewing something to some impartiality of risk exists, that maybe yes, maybe no. If it's yes, then you take it down a little further. Can it be mitigated? Can it be mitigated to a level in which your organization can accept? If yes, you document how it can be lowered. If no, the risk level is too high to proceed, then perhaps the service cannot be offered until the impartiality is able to be mitigated. Okay, that's going to bring a close to the first section we are covering today under general requirements. Going to move on to section 4.2, second section of the 2017 standard. That's confidentiality. So what are we referring to here? Can be thought as a state of keeping or being kept secret or private, and the principle that an institution or individual should not reveal information about their clients to a third party without the consent of the client or a clear legal reason. Probably other definitions out there, but I think right off the bat, that's what it is. Confidential, keep secret. You don't discuss your client's information that you're aware of with anyone else other than between yourself and the client without their approval, and unless there is a legal reason to do so. Not a whole lot different here when compared to 2005. Customer confidentiality came up in that section. Again, I have some examples here from the 2005 standard where customer confidentiality requirements are installed in that standard. 415C have policies and procedures to ensure the protection of customer confidentiality confidential information under service to the customer. Shall be willing to cooperate with the customer provided that the laboratory ensure confidentiality of other customers. So that's when somebody wants to come on site, want to witness the testing or calibration. Should be able to do that. However, during that course, you just have to maintain the confidentiality of the other client's work that may be in there at the time. Under control of data, B 5472, control of data. Of course, procedures and established and shall include but not limited to the integrity of confidentiality of data. So if you're transitioning in 2005, these are things that you have in place. If they're effective for you, you want to carry forth into the 2017 standard. So looking at, we're going to dissect this a little bit more on the next slide. 421, very first requirement under confidentiality. The laboratory shall be responsible through legally enforcement commitments. First time I was looking at that, what does that mean? Of course, if there are statutory requirements, often there's laws within states that are directed at contract laws. That's what we're referring there, through legally enforceable commitments for the management of all information obtained or created during the performance of laboratory activity. The laboratory shall inform the customer in advance of the information it intends to place in the public domain, except for information it intends to place, except for information that the customer makes publicly available or when agreed between the laboratory and the customer, let's say for the purpose of responding to complaints. All other information is considered proprietary information and shall be regarded as confidential. So breaking that down, highlights, requires the laboratory shall legally commit itself to keep information obtained or created during the performance of assignment for client secret. Legally enforceable commitment can be, for example, contractual agreements. You got to inform the customer, your customer in advance if the information is intended to be placed in the public domain, except when customer makes publicly available or when agreed with the customer. All other information is considered proprietary information and shall be regarded as confidential. (422) When the laboratory is required by law or authorized by contractual arrangements to release confidential information, the customer or individual concerned shall unless prohibited by law, be notified of the information provided. That's pretty well self-explanatory there. That if you release to a third party, it's required by law, or within the contract, before you release it, you need to let your customer know that you're releasing it, unless there's something written into the law or the contracts that prohibit you from conveying that to your client. Information about the customer obtained from sources other than customers, say a complainant or regulator, for example, shall be confidential between the customer and the laboratory. The provider or source of this information shall be confidential to the laboratory and shall not be shared with the customer unless agreed by the source. But before you divulge that information, you need to find out, they say it is a complaint against a customer that you're doing work for, and you need to find out whether or not the person issuing that, if they want to remain anonymous. Personnel, including any committee members, contractors, personnel of external bodies or individual acting on the laboratory behalf, shall keep confidential all information obtained or created during performance of laboratory activity, except as required by law. So personnel, of course, shall, you folks that are under your permanent employment, shall keep it information confidential. And to assure this, perhaps it can be handled and put into an employment contract. So your subcontracting work, that's what we're referring to here as external bodies. It could be your subcontractors. You need to assure that they maintain the confidentiality of the client, which you have had them do for you as the subcontractor. All right, very good. That's the end of the today's webinar. As far as the presentation, this isn't all slide. I'm just saying it. Everything's real time right now, so I'm going to go and look at the questions that we have. Bear with me a minute. I'll get to that page. Go over it. Then after I've done the questions, I have a couple important dates. On your screen there, actually, I should have mentioned it at the beginning, you should have a handout there. You can open that up, and that's coming up in a few weeks. We're going to discuss that a little bit here. I'll try again. I probably heard me say this before. This is real time. I'm trying to make sure I understand the questions as they're written. What are some examples of documenting impartiality? Can it be as simple as a sign agreement? It can, if you're a small organization, employees sign off on it. Like I said, it's more of an ongoing basis now. And I think, I gave it one good place to, if nowhere else, where you can make that record. And what was the management review? So would be an example of a place you can document the impartiality. Another one would be training. Training your staff on impartiality, like we specified there at the beginning. Not just impartiality, customer confidentiality. Impartiality can lead to adverse test results being or calibration results being performed. So just putting aside the requirements within the 17025 is something you may want to train your individuals on. Discuss some examples of safeguards regarding impartiality. I gave a couple of them there. I think one of the biggest during the reporting lines within the lab. Who are they reporting to? Does that individual have a different agenda? Laboratory technicians should not be reporting to someone, let's say, in sales or production that may have a different agenda. They're concerned with doing their daily testing calibration without the influences of other folks within the organization. They may have another agenda, put undue pressure on them. Other example, we mentioned something about a quarantine period there. If impartiality may be compromised. An example we gave during the presentation was someone brought a new client to the lab that's involved in the testing or calibration. Perhaps remove them away from testing those artifacts that come into the lab for a set period of time. During the course, this also gave a simple questionnaire. Does that can be used as safeguard? Is there a risk to impartiality here? Yes, no. If there is it something that can be lowered to an acceptable level? Yes, no. Ask yourself if you can proceed or not proceed. I'm reading them, never noticed this before, but they're all sort of running together. I'm trying to figure out where one ends and the next one begins. I'm reading this directly as I'm saying it. What does mean the laboratory activity, testing, calibration, sampling, or the associated activities? Yeah, like internal auditing, corrective action, etc., are also included in lab activities. Yeah, we went over that specifically right under the very first requirement, 411, laboratory activities. It's not just the nuts and bolts of those folks doing the testing and calibration. The internal auditors, for example, there's less repetition in the 2017 standard. So, for example, it was very specific in 2005 with the internal auditor be trained. That is not specified. That will come under personnel and competence. It's all personnel in that example. And wherever possible, they shouldn't basically audit their own type of work, audit their own work. That's not specified anymore. However, it is not directly implied during that in that section. It is implied under 411 laboratory activities that would include the internal auditor. Not really. I'm reading the question. Is there a way to report to the accrediting bodies, a break on impartiality. Not really understanding what's being said there. We have a general complaint procedure, just like you're required to. Someone has a complaint with our lab, we have a protocol that we follow. If it's something where a requirement's not being met, we would require that lab to take corrective action. Does the lab have to be 17025 certified to test its own company's production? I would say it does not have to, be. If really would need to know what the specific situation is in here. For like I said, I'm on the calibration end. I can speak on behalf of calibration laboratories, and we do have several that are within a production facility that has their own calibration lab that calibrates, say, the new product, or let's say pressure gauges. You're producing pressure gauges. Calibration, they're calibrated before they're sold, and customers can bring those back and have them recalibrated by the manufacturer. In those instances, don't have to be 17025 accredited, but they would have to meet the requirements for traceability. How do you identify risk to the relationship? Well, my answer might be different than yours, but basically, let's say point blank, you're have an individual in the lab, and their brother is a customer of yours, and those items are brought into the lab. Of course, it could be potential conflicts of interest there. Could be high if the individual knew who that was. They know whose other items are coming in there and being tested. Could risk the impartiality there. So how do you identify a risk to impartiality relationship? If it affects, can adversely affect the end result, the reports that you're producing, identify them as high, middle, low, or none. If they're high, you need to look at it and perhaps mitigate it to a more acceptable level. Remove that source, that individual, where impartiality might be a risk. Can a single document signed at the time of contract, specifically designated for impartiality and confidentiality, is enough, or shall there be others at different levels? The big difference between 2005, 2017 in this area is it's more an ongoing thing. I think it's a good ideal to perhaps have that reviewed and gone over again. If that's the only way it's being conveyed to your staff. If there's other ways to convey it, having them signed once, and then having perhaps training on it at different intervals throughout the employment tenure, that could be sufficient without having to go back and re-sign the contract. But the big thing is it's more of an ongoing basis. Personnel should be aware of it, and should be presented more so than just on the initial date of employment. That's my thoughts on it as far as a one-time signed agreement. I'd be looking, for is there anything else done throughout the year? that would reinforce the individual's knowledge of the requirements regarding impartiality. I think someone's answering a question here. You're asking about in-house, I guess, testing your own products, calibrating. It says, if you wanted to have an accredited report, then yes, of course, if you have a need to have an accredited report, that big stamp of approval of it being a traceable report, then it would need to come from an accredited organization. Bear with me, I'm trying to, I think things like I'm getting more questions as I'm going along here. And this next question, I think you just need to be familiar with what your lab and the statutory requirements that are pertaining to your area of interest. Government agency, what procedures does the ISO standard require to release them? And it was specific, it has to be released if it's required by law. So if there's a law specifying that, or if it's within the contract and there's laws that are that oversees contractual law, then there would be instances where it would have to be released. Is it possible to have a certificate of participation for this webinar? Right now, we do not, as far as something being generated internally. We don't offer anything like that. It's something that we're always looking to improve. That I think this is the first time I've been asked, but something we can look at doing. Just when you finish the webinar, to get some sort of a record showing that you've attended it. This next one I don't think pertains. What is the best format for writing a quality manual? To me, I would say look at the standard and structure. As far as auditing it, for being easiest, I would construct it in the manner that the standard is written. Asked about the audio of this session. Yes, go to the PJLA website. I might have mentioned that when I was going at the onset here. You can get the recording for this, and there's also all the past webinars we did there are available. The recorded versions are available. Major and significant difference between impartiality and confidentiality. Impartiality, when I think of that, the thing that comes to mind is undue pressures that's going to affect your job. Customer confidentiality is, of course, sort of specified in the definition. Keeping secret, I guess, is the most blunt way I can think of the difference of items specifically relating to the testing and calibration activities that you're performing for that client. Partiality stems way beyond just any specific client. Not really sure what this looks like. The last question here. How can you demonstrate impartiality outside of the operating facility? Not really sure what's being asked there. I know I gave some examples, such as going over the any employment contract or quarantine an individual from a possible conflict that would cause an impartiality issue. Not really sure what's being meant there outside the organization. If I had a specific example that you were referring to, might be able to look at it. One thing, we did talk about even training. So if there are those situations that could happen outside your facility, as if I'm reading this correctly, you think it could be a threat, then it's something that could be done internally via a training session, perhaps. Not sure if I'm really answering the question there. I apologize, but that's the way I'm reading it. Okay, so it's just I did. Okay. Okay, got a couple things here before I let you go. Again, I believe I got everybody's questions. I was for a little difficulty this time, and now it seems to be. I think it was because people were typing as I was trying to read them. It was all sort of to run together. So I apologize if I missed anything there. Before I let you go, again, this is your handout, and BJLA coming up. You see, very in just a few weeks here, and I'm actually going to be the presenter. So going to headquarters. That's where this training. It's going to be a 2 days of training, and it's not just going to be specific to the differences between the 17025. 2005, 2017. For those of you, I know we offered transition courses during the course of 2019. This course is going to be much more detailed. It's going to go over all the requirements in general. So if you're new to accreditation, or perhaps for someone who's going to be doing your internal audits, requirement that person be competent. Best way to show that, perhaps, is create a record of it would be a training record. So this is a 2-day course. It's a in-depth look at the 17025-2017 requirements. During the course of the course, we talk about objective evidence that can be presented to show show that compliance is being met. There's group discussions. There's also case studies that are done in class. So that's coming up on November 19th and 20th at PJLA headquarters building, which is in Troy, Michigan. So stay there, register today. Class size may be limited. Considering I'll be doing that next month, we will not actually have a webinar in November. So our next webinar is going to be our December webinar, and it's going to be a good one. So not saying that they're all not good, but this one here is one I did early in 2018. I want to expand on it quite a bit. Now I've done quite a few of assessments, got a lot of feedback from the 2017 standard. So what this webinar is going to do, it's going to look at the key differences between 2005 and 2017. Probably not drill down like we do individually when we look at each section within the standard, but just basically identify the key differences, probably section by section look at the key differences between what 2005 required and what 2017 is required. Again, those folks that are still in 2005, you have until August 31st, so we have to come on site and do your transition assessment before August 31st, 2020. So I hope be able to see some of y'all up there in Troy, Michigan. We have good attendance today. Looking forward to wrapping down this year with our last webinar on December 20th of this year. Appreciate everybody logging in. Enjoy the rest of your day and hope everybody has a wonderful weekend. Thank you.